Mayfair, winter of 1819. Snow fell softly over the district, laying a thick white mantle across the pavement as she wrenched open the door of the waiting carriage and threw herself inside. Her veil caught for a heartbeat on the inner hook and tore with a faint snap, giving way only when she dragged her body into the darkness. Her hands were bleeding, thin cuts, the sharp signatures of shattered glass, and the navy blue silk of her gown was soaked to the knees. The driver's seat was empty. No servant in sight. Only the crest engraved on the door. A crowned lion above crossed swords glimmered under the muted glow of the street lamps. She did not know to whom the carriage belonged. It did not matter. Any refuge would do when the hunter was so close. She slammed the door shut in a hurried motion, holding her breath as she curled into the corner of the upholstered seat. The interior smelled of leather, tobacco, and something softer beneath, perhaps dried lavender, or the lingering perfume of a lady who had sat there before. Through her damp glove, she felt the cold bite of metal as her hand pressed against the frame. Outside, male voices rang out, footsteps striking fast against uneven stone, commands barked with sharp authority. She couldn't have gone far. Search the alleys now. She shut her eyes. Her heart thundered in her chest, a drum she feared might be heard through the walls of the carriage. She tried not to move, not to breathe, not to exist. And then the door opened again. If you too cherish period stories, those that whisper like old letters and echo like longing hearts, leave your like and subscribe to the Countess's Tales. Your support allows these narratives to cross oceans and reach more souls around the world. And before you go, tell me in the comments which city and country you're watching from. It's always enchanting to discover how far our stories travel. The man who entered the carriage did not see her at once. He was too occupied shaking the snow from his dark overcoat, adjusting his leather gloves while muttering something about delays and the tedious obligations of high society. His hair, dark brown, nearly black beneath the weak light, and his broad shoulders filled the space with quiet authority. He appeared to be just past 30. Only when he sat did his eyes meet hers. He froze. The hand already lifting to rap against the roof and signal the driver stopped mid-air. She could not move. She only stared back at him, still folded into the far corner, her soaked gown clinging to her body, the torn veil hanging loose, like an open wound against the doorframe. She knew exactly what he saw, a desperate woman, unaccompanied, trespassing in a carriage that did not belong to her, a disgrace, a mad woman, perhaps worse. "Don't scream," she whispered before he could speak. Her voice came out rough, fractured. "Please, just don't scream." He lowered his hand slowly. He studied her in silence, his gaze tracing her injured hands, the ruined dress, the way she trembled, not from the cold, but from something far deeper. Genuine fear, the kind that could not be feigned. "Who is chasing you?" he asked at last. His voice was deep and measured, yet there was nothing threatening in it. She opened her mouth, closed it again. She did not know what to say. She did not know whether she could trust him, but the voices outside persisted, the footsteps drawing nearer. And still, he had not called for help. Chapter 1. The Intruder and the Silence. She did not answer his question. Instead, she tightened her injured fingers against the water-heavy folds of her skirt and turned her gaze toward the window, where the men's shadows still shifted beneath the lamplight. 5, perhaps 6, all dressed in black, too still, too deliberate, like crows waiting for the right moment. The stranger leaned forward slightly. Not enough to invade her space, but enough for Juliet to feel the weight of his quiet attention settle upon her. "If I step out of this carriage now and ask what they are looking for," he said calmly, "what will they tell me?" Her throat burned as she swallowed. "They'll say I'm a thief or a prostitute." Her voice was low, carefully controlled. "Anything that makes it acceptable to drag me back. And is it true?" "No." He leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. Melted snow dripped from his overcoat onto the carriage's expensive carpeting. Juliet noticed then the ring on his left hand, not a wedding band, but a discreet signet engraved with an ancient crest, a symbol that required no explanation. Nobility, Of course he was. "Your name," he said without preamble. She hesitated. To give her name was to surrender the last illusion of control she possessed, but lying now would be useless. He had already seen her. He already knew too much. "Juliet," she said at last. "Juliet Colburn." No reaction, no recognition. He merely nodded as though filing the information away in some quiet corner of his mind. "Colburn," he repeated. "I don't know the family." "There's nothing to know," she replied, bitterness slipping through despite her effort to contain it. "My father lost everything before he died. My mother followed him 3 months later. We were left alone." The word escaped in the plural before she could stop it. He raised an eyebrow, the first visible reaction since entering the carriage. "Alone?" Juliet closed her eyes for a moment, drew in a steady breath. Perhaps it was better this way. Perhaps the full truth was the only currency she had left. "I have 2 younger siblings," she admitted, opening her eyes and meeting his gaze. "Catherine is 14. Thomas is 11. When our parents died, we went to live with our uncle. He promised to care for us. Said we would be treated as his own children." She did not need to finish. Something shifted in his expression, a subtle tightening of the jaw, barely perceptible, yet unmistakable. He understood perfectly what kind of promise that had been. "Where are they now?" he asked directly. "Hiding." Her chest tightened around the word. "With the governess, Mrs. Henley. She's the only person in that house with a conscience left. She kept them in the back room while I fled. Said she would create a distraction if necessary, but she won't be able to hide them for long." "And why did you run tonight?" Juliet's hand trembled. She clenched it hard, ignoring the pain from the cuts. "Because he didn't want only me." The pause was brief but heavy. "He wanted to sell Catherine." The words fell like shattered glass, final, irrevocable. The silence that followed was dense. He did not feign shock, did not offer theatrical outrage. He simply listened, and somehow that was worse. "There was a man in the house this afternoon," Juliet continued, her voice growing quieter. "Old, wealthy, an ancient title. My uncle received him in the library. I heard the conversation through the door. He offered money, a great deal of money, in exchange for Catherine as his wife." She did not need to explain the rest. In 1819, everyone knew what men like that did to 14-year-old girls. His fingers tightened around his own arms, the knuckles whitening. "Did you try to stop it?" "Yes." A short, bitter laugh escaped her. "He locked me in my room, said I had no right to an opinion, that we were a burden, that he had already done more than his share of charity, and that if I didn't keep quiet, Thomas would be sent to the mines in the north." Juliet drew a deep breath, fighting the tremor threatening to take over her body. "I broke the window with a candlestick. Cut my hands on the glass, but I managed to get out. Mrs. Henley promised to keep Catherine and Thomas hidden until I found help. But my uncle sent the men after me." She swallowed hard. "And now I have nowhere to go, no money, no family. Only an elderly governess protecting 2 children from a man who will not hesitate to sell them to cover gambling debts." Outside, the voices began to drift away. The footsteps grew more scattered. A treacherous wave of relief passed through her, but Juliet did not allow herself to relax. Not yet. Then he rapped twice against the roof of the carriage. The sound echoed far too loudly. She flinched instinctively. "Where to, Your Grace?" came the muffled voice of the driver. "Your Grace. A duke." The reality struck her with delayed force. She had not merely invaded a carriage, she had invaded the carriage of a duke. "Home," he replied, without taking his eyes off her. And quickly. The carriage lurched into motion. Wheels groaned over the wet stone. Juliet felt the world tilt, the consequence of her choices finally asserting itself. I didn't ask to be taken anywhere," she said. But the words emerged too weak to sound like protest. He adjusted his gloves, the movement precise, almost automatic. "No," a brief pause, "but you cannot remain in the street, and you clearly have nowhere else to go. You don't know me." "You owe me nothing." She lifted her chin. And now you know I'm not alone. We are 3 siblings without a name, without fortune, without anything but trouble." "True," he agreed, looking out the window as Mayfair began to vanish beneath the snow. "But I saw your hands, I saw your face, and I know how to recognize real panic, the kind that does not come from fear for oneself alone." Juliet did not reply. Gratitude felt too small. Distrust felt too necessary. Still, whether this was charity, curiosity, or something more dangerous, it was all that stood between her and the street, or between Catherine and the man who meant to buy her. "What should I call you?" she asked, breaking the heavy silence. He turned back toward her. In the unsteady light filtering through the window, Juliet saw his eyes clearly at last, brown, almost gold, marked by something old. Not hardness. Weight. "Hawthorne," he said. "Garrett Hawthorne. Duke of Stonemere." The name settled between them like an unspoken sentence. Stonemere, northern lands, an ancient fortune, a reputation without visible stain. And she was there, wet, wounded, uninvited, asking for help not only for herself, but for 2 siblings he had never met. "Thank you," she whispered, because there was nothing else she could offer. He did not answer. He merely turned his gaze back to the window as the carriage moved through the white night toward a destination Juliet did not know and did not control. But for the first time that evening, fear gave way to something else. Exhaustion, and a dangerous, unsettling sensation she dared not call hope. That perhaps, just perhaps, she had found someone who would not hand her back to the hell she had escaped. Someone who might, just possibly, help her save Catherine and Thomas before it was too late. Chapter 2. The Weight of the Decision. Garrett Hawthorne was not a man of impulse. Every decision he made was measured, weighed against consequences he had learned to anticipate with near clinical precision. At 29, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark brown eyes that missed very little, he had inherited the title at 19, when his father's heart had decided without warning to stop beating. His eyes, the color of aged wood, rarely betrayed his thoughts, and 10 years at the head of a dukedom had taught him to think before acting, and to distrust gestures that seemed too good to be sensible. And yet, there he was, taking a stranger to his London residence, not merely a stranger, but a woman fleeing an uncle who bartered nieces like goods, with 2 younger siblings hidden somewhere in the city, depending on her ability to find help before they were discovered, or worse. He watched her from the corner of his eye as the carriage moved through the silent streets. Juliet had closed her eyes, her head resting against the upholstery, but tension had not left her body. Her shoulders remained rigid. Her hands, folded in her lap, were still marked with dried blood. Even exhausted, she did not allow herself to relax. She was thinking of them, the children. Catherine, 14. Thomas, 11. Garrett turned his gaze toward the darkness beyond the window. He tried to arrange the facts as he would any administrative problem. 3 orphans, a squandered fortune, a legally recognized guardian, a young girl promised to an old man in exchange for money. None of it was unlikely. None of it sounded exaggerated. Women did not shatter windows and tear their own hands on a whim. But truth was not the same as prudence. Sheltering an unmarried woman was already a risk. Sheltering 3 minors under another man's guardianship was far worse. It was an invitation to scandal, legal scrutiny, and public opinion. If anyone discovered it, and London always did, the children would be returned to their uncle by legal order. The law protected recognized guardians, not defenseless orphans, even when the guardian was a respectable monster. And yet, he had not ordered the carriage to stop. He had not handed her over to the men searching for her. The carriage turned left into Grosvenor Square. The imposing facades rose around them like stone sentinels, dark windows, closed gates. The social season was in full fervor, balls, dinners, endless obligations, but at that hour, only silence remained. Juliet opened her eyes as the carriage slowed. She straightened carefully, adjusting her soaked dress in a gesture that attempted to reclaim some fragment of dignity. Only then did Garrett realize she was younger than he had assumed. Perhaps 23, 24. Light brown hair, eyes of blue-green that seemed to shift with the light, a delicate face, yet supported by a jaw too firm for someone who had learned to yield. Beautiful, but not in a showy way. The kind of beauty that passed unnoticed in drawing rooms filled with feathers, jewels and loud voices, and entirely compromised should anyone see her step down from his carriage at that hour. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice still rough. "Grosvenor Square." "My London residence." She nodded slowly. No surprise, no visible relief, only weary acceptance. The carriage came to a halt. Garrett stepped down first, dismissing the approaching servant with a brief gesture. He offered his hand to Juliet. She hesitated, only a second before taking it. Her fingers were icy even through the damp glove. When her feet touched the ground, she stumbled slightly. He steadied her by the elbow, keeping the contact minimal. Correct. "Enter through the side," he murmured. "Avoid the lamplight." She obeyed without question. Garrett followed closely behind, keenly aware that every second spent outside increased the risk. A single nod sent the driver around to the rear. The house was silent. Only 2 candles burned in the narrow corridor leading to the service wing. They climbed the stairs, passing portraits of ancestors who seemed to watch him with mute reproach. He stopped before a door on the 2nd floor. "You may stay here tonight." The guest room was small, rarely used, clean but impersonal. The fireplace cold, the bed neatly made, furniture protected by pale covers. Juliet stepped inside slowly, as though expecting everything to dissolve at her touch. She ran her injured fingers across the coverlet. "And tomorrow?" she asked without turning to face him. "Catherine and Thomas cannot remain hidden forever. Mrs. Henley is brave, but she is only a governess. My uncle will not hesitate to dismiss her if he suspects anything." Garrett leaned against the doorframe. "A fair question." "Tomorrow we will talk," he said. "I need to understand the legal situation, who the official guardian is, whether there are other relatives, if there is any room to maneuver." She turned then. Her gaze held neither gratitude nor relief. There was something more dangerous in it, a silent test. "You do not know me," she said. "You do not know whether I can be trusted. I could be lying about everything. I could be exactly what those men claimed." "You could," he agreed, his tone unchanged. "But you are not." "How do you know?" Garrett did not answer at once. He studied her in silence, the lifted chin despite exhaustion, the proud rigidity of a wounded body, the raw strength of someone who had shattered glass to save others. "Because liars do not bleed for their stories," he said at last, "and you were not running from what you had done. You were running to protect those you love." Her eyes filled with tears. Juliet blinked quickly, pushing them back, and turned away. "Thank you," she murmured. "For them, not for me." Garrett inclined his head and stepped back into the corridor. He was about to close the door when she spoke again. "Why are you doing this? You owe us nothing." He stopped, one hand still on the frame, his body already turned to leave. "Because children should not pay for the sins of adults." He closed the door before she could respond. He stood in the corridor for a long moment, listening to the silence of the house, the distant ticking of a clock, the wind pressing against the windows. Then he went to his own chamber, locked the door, and remained in the dark, trying to understand what he had just done, and why, for the first time in years, he did not regret it. Tomorrow, he would have to act quickly. Remove 2 children from a guarded house, confront a guardian with legal authority, protect 3 orphans without destroying reputations, theirs or his own. It was imprudent. It was madness. But when he closed his eyes, all he saw was Juliet's face as she said, "Catherine is 14. And then he knew. There was no choice at all. Chapter 3. The Dawn of Decisions. Juliet remained seated on the edge of the bed, her soaked dress still clinging to her body, watching moonlight seep through the heavy curtains. Her hands ached. The cuts had stopped bleeding, but they throbbed with every beat of her heart. She did not dare search for water, did not dare make a sound, did not dare relax. At every noise, the wind pressing against the windows, the creak of old wood, distant footsteps of a servant on the lower floors, her entire body stiffened, prepared to flee once more. But no one came. No door opened. No voice called her name. For the first time in months she was safe, and yet she felt no relief. Catherine, Thomas. Their faces appeared with painful clarity in the dark. Catherine, with brown eyes far too serious for 14, always shielding her brother when Juliet was not near. Thomas, with his shy smile and ink-stained fingers, he loved to draw, even after their uncle forbade him from wasting paper. "They will be all right," Mrs. Henley promised. But promises did not lock doors. They did not stop determined men, and her uncle was determined to turn their misfortune into profit. Juliet closed her eyes, trying to push away the images that insisted on forming. Catherine being dragged toward a carriage, Thomas sent north to mines where boys did not reach adulthood, Mrs. Henley dismissed without references, condemned to poverty for having helped them, and she forced into some advantageous marriage chosen not for affection, but for whatever sum her uncle could still extract from her. Everything now depended on a man she barely knew, a duke. A man with every possible reason to return her to the law at dawn and forget he had ever seen her. "Why are you doing this?" The question returned without an answer. He had said only that children should not pay for the sins of adults. But London was full of children paying exactly that price. Orphans on the streets, girls sold, bastards hidden like dust beneath carpets, boys consumed by factories and mines. Why would Catherine be different? Why Thomas? Why her? The darkness began to thin. The deep blue of night yielded to the pale grey of dawn. Juliet rose carefully, her legs numb after hours of stillness, and moved toward the window. She drew the curtain back just enough to look. Grosvenor Square stretched below, orderly and silent. Imposing mansions surrounded the central garden, bare trees etched against the brightening sky. Fresh snow covered everything like a veil too clean for such a cruel world. Carriages appeared along the side streets. Servants opened gates. London was waking, and with it the consequences. Her uncle would already know she had escaped. He would have questioned Mrs. Henley. He would be searching. Men like him did not tolerate defiance, least of all from nieces without name, fortune, or male protection. And when he came, he would bring the law with him, legal guardian, orphans under his responsibility, unjustified flight, words that would sound perfectly reasonable in any courtroom. A soft knock at the door made Juliet turn at once. "Miss Colburn." The female voice was elderly, controlled, kind. "His Grace asked that I bring hot water and clean clothes." Juliet hesitated before opening the door only a narrow inch. A white-haired woman with her hair drawn into a severe bun stood holding a porcelain basin. Her face was lined by years, but her eyes were alert. She wore an immaculate uniform, black, with a crisp white apron. "May I come in?" Juliet stepped aside. The woman entered with quiet efficiency, setting the basin on the dressing table. She returned moments later with a simple, dark green wool dress and a tray of tea, bread, and cheese. "I am Mrs. Bartley, the housekeeper," she said, arranging everything with precision. "His Grace asked that you be treated as a guest, and that I see to your hands." Juliet looked down at the cuts, still marked with dried blood and glass. "Did he tell you anything?" "Only what was necessary." "Mrs. Bartley gestured toward the chair. "Sit down, dear." Juliet obeyed. The housekeeper worked in silence, washing the wounds with warm water and applying an ointment that stung before easing. Steady hands, confident hands, hands that had tended many kinds of pain. "Do you have children?" Juliet asked, breaking the silence. Mrs. Bartley smiled, but it was restrained. "I had one." She adjusted the bandage carefully. "Lost him at sea 15 years ago." Juliet's chest tightened. "Nearly Thomas's age." "I'm so sorry." "So am I." The housekeeper finished the dressing and stepped back. "The Duke told me about your siblings, said you crossed the city wounded because you had no other choice. That tells me a great deal about who you are." Tears came without warning. Juliet tried to stop them, but could not entirely. "I don't know what to do," she confessed softly. "I don't know how to protect them." "His Grace will," Mrs. Bartley said with quiet certainty. He may seem distant, but he does not abandon children in danger. Why? The housekeeper hesitated. Because he failed to protect someone once, she answered at last, and he has lived with that ever since. Firm footsteps sounded in the corridor. Garrett Hawthorne entered without ceremony, already dressed for the day. Impeccable dark coat, tailored waistcoat, cravat perfectly tied. In the morning light, he seemed even more imposing. His eyes found Juliet's at once. "I need information," he said bluntly. "Your uncle's full name, address, the governess's name, the layout of the house. How many servants?" Juliet stood, ignoring the faint dizziness. "You're going to get them?" "Today, before he appeals formally to the law." "But he is the legal guardian. If you simply—" "I know," Garrett folded his arms, "but the law also acts when there is immediate danger. If there is evidence he intended to bargain your sister, that changes everything." "The man from yesterday," Juliet said, her heart racing. "His name is Lord Heathfield. Old, walks with a cane, said he owns property in Kent." Garrett nodded. "I know the name. Widowed 3 times. No heirs." The hardness in his voice left no doubt. Juliet stepped forward, her bandaged hands lifting in an unconscious gesture. "Please." "Catherine cannot. Thomas is only a child." Garrett held her gaze for a long moment. "I will bring them here," he said at last, "but after that, we will need a plan. Hiding them will not be enough. We will have to remove your uncle legally." "How?" "I don't know yet." He turned to leave, then paused. "But I did not begin this to fail." And he was gone. Juliet remained where she stood, her heart beating far too fast, holding on to a dangerous hope, too fragile to trust, too strong to ignore. For the first time since their parents' deaths, someone was willing to fight for Catherine and Thomas. And she knew, from that dawn onward, there would be no turning back. Chapter 4. The Silent Rescue. Garrett Hawthorne did not take the carriage bearing the ducal crest. He chose a plain hired one, unmarked. He brought only 2 men, Jenkins, his trusted driver, and Davies, a former soldier now employed in the stables. Both discreet, both loyal. Men who knew when to speak, and above all when not to. The uncle's house stood in Bloomsbury, a respectable neighborhood without aristocratic pretensions. Ideal for a man who cultivated the appearance of decency while trading nieces like goods. Garrett studied the soot-darkened brick facade. 3 stories, narrow windows, a faded green door, no sign of movement. 10 o'clock in the morning, chosen with care. Late enough that the servants would be occupied. Early enough to avoid social callers. "Wait here," Garrett said to Jenkins. "If I don't come out within 20 minutes, go for help." The driver nodded, reins firm in his hands. Garrett stepped down, adjusting his hat. Davies remained near the gate, motionless, watching the street with quiet attention, not as an obvious guard, but as a presence sufficient to discourage rash impulses. The plan was simple. Garrett would enter alone, as a respectable visitor, and attempt an arrangement. Davies would remain visible enough to be noticed, imposing respect, yet silent enough not to draw attention. Garrett approached the door and knocked. A young maid answered, surprise evident at the sight of a well-dressed gentleman at that hour. "I need to speak with the master of the house. It is urgent." "Do you have a card, sir?" Garrett handed her a simple card bearing only his name. No title. He had no intention of revealing his rank before it became necessary. The maid disappeared. Garrett stepped into the narrow vestibule, heavy with the smell of cheap wax and dampness. Faded wallpaper, worn carpet, the remnants of respectability upheld by force of habit. Heavy footsteps descended the stairs. The man who appeared was in his early 50s, his body bloated by drink, his face flushed. Thinning hair carefully arranged to disguise baldness, small, suspicious eyes. "I don't know any Hawthorne," he said curtly. "What do you want?" "I've come to speak about your niece." "Juliet Colburn." The man's expression hardened, suspicion sharpened into irritation. "That ungrateful girl ran off last night. If you found her, I demand she be returned. I am her legal guardian." "I know," Garrett replied calmly. "That is precisely why I am here. She arrived on my property injured and desperate. She made serious accusations. Lies, the man spat. I gave them shelter and food, and she dares slander me. Them? Garrett repeated evenly. There are others under your guardianship besides your niece. The hesitation was brief but sufficient. 2 younger ones, also my responsibility. Of course. Garrett clasped his hands behind his back. And what are your plans for them? That is none of your concern. It becomes my concern when I am told you intended to give a 14-year-old girl in marriage to Lord Heathfield. Silence fell at once, and it was revealing. The man went pale, then flushed with rage. Slander! Heathfield is a respectable gentleman who offered an honourable marriage. To a 14-year-old, Garrett said, the coldness now unmistakable, a widower known for burying young wives. The uncle stepped back. Who do you think you are to question me? I have the law on my side, and I have sufficient means to make your social position delicate. Garrett needed time. Davies should already be at the rear of the house. Where are the children? In their rooms, where they learn obedience. Locked in? They are penniless orphans, the man snapped. They should be grateful. Garrett took a step forward. The other man pressed himself against the wall. I will make a single offer, Garrett said with surgical precision. Release the guardianship, sign the papers. In exchange, this matter will not be taken to court, nor whispered in the appropriate drawing rooms. Never, the man exploded. They are my responsibility. Your investment, Garrett corrected coolly. 3 mouths that bring you nothing, at least not yet. The uncle narrowed his eyes. Something had struck home. Do not pretend ignorance, Garrett continued. I know Lord Heathfield was not the first to express interest, and I know how much men like him are willing to pay for a young, obedient girl without family protection. The silence that followed was different. Not anger, calculation. So you don't know what you're talking about, the uncle muttered, but the conviction had gone. I know exactly, Garrett said, stepping closer, and I also know that none of these arrangements were formalized, no contracts, no written promises, only intentions and expectations. The man swallowed and said nothing. What are you suggesting? A better alternative. Garrett kept his tone controlled. Clean, immediate, without risk. I assume guardianship of the siblings. Today. You receive financial compensation sufficient to cover your most urgent debts, and you leave this affair without inconvenient questions. You're talking about money, the uncle said, almost with contempt. I am speaking the only language you respect. The man's eyes gleamed, pure greed, undisguised. How much? Garrett did not answer at once. He studied him for a moment, assessing not the value of the children, but the worth of the man's soul. Enough that you will never need to sell them again, he said at last, nor yourself. The uncle laughed softly, a harsh sound. And if I refuse? Garrett did not answer immediately. He simply watched him, for a moment too long to be comfortable. Then he spoke with the same controlled calm as before, but something had changed, deeper, more final. Before coming here, he said, I asked a few questions. The man frowned. Questions? Discreet ones, Garrett replied, stepping closer. About old debts, gambling at clubs where respectable names prefer not to be mentioned, patient creditors you have delayed too long, and an incident in Bath that never reached the papers, for very specific reasons. The silence that followed was absolute. The uncle's face drained of color. You're bluffing. I rarely do. Garrett inclined his head slightly. I could cite amounts, dates, names, but I see no need. The man swallowed. If those matters come to light, Garrett continued quietly, your position as guardian will be the least of your concerns. You wouldn't dare. I do not intend to dare anything, Garrett interrupted. I intend to conclude this situation with civility. He opened his wallet, withdrew a thick envelope and placed it on the side table without pushing it forward. Here is half the amount required to settle your most pressing debts and allow you to leave London for a time. A pause. In return, you sign the release of guardianship, No later than tomorrow. The uncle stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. You are buying my nieces as well, he muttered harshly. I am buying their freedom, Garrett corrected, and a life far from you. The silence stretched. There was no outrage, no surprise, only calculation. The uncle looked away briefly, as though tallying invisible losses and gains. At last he nodded stiffly. Bring the papers. They will be prepared today, Garrett replied, signed tomorrow, and the remainder of the payment will be delivered then. The man pressed his lips together, resentful, but did not retreat. He drew a breath, straightened his coat, and spoke loudly enough to be heard. Mrs. Henley. The governess appeared from the rear passage, rigid, her face too pale to conceal the tension. Fetch them, he ordered without raising his voice. I know you hid them. Mrs. Henley hesitated only a moment. Then she inclined her head, not in submission but in acknowledgement that there was no alternative, and disappeared down the corridor. The silence that followed was heavy. Soon, light footsteps approached. Catherine and Thomas appeared at the kitchen doorway, guided by the governess. Catherine held her brother's wrist tightly. Thomas kept his gaze lowered, attentive to every movement of their uncle. Pack your things, the man said, rehearsed coldness in his tone. You are leaving. Catherine lifted her face, confused. Now? Now. Garrett remained still, watching. He did not interfere. He did not hurry them. This moment needed to unfold exactly as it was. The carriage is waiting, the uncle added curtly. You will go with Mr. Hawthorne. The name seemed to cost him. Mrs. Henley placed her hands on the children's shoulders and guided them out. Catherine looked back once, not at her uncle, but at Garrett, as if seeking confirmation. Garrett inclined his head slightly. It was enough. When the door closed behind them, silence reclaimed the house. Tomorrow, Garrett said at last, you will sign the documents and receive the remainder of the agreed payment. After that, he added evenly, you will disappear from their lives. The uncle laughed softly without humor. You truly believe this ends here? Garrett held his gaze without blinking. For them, yes. Then, with a calm gesture, he withdrew a card from his inner pocket and placed it on the side table, as one closes a matter. For your convenience, he said simply. The uncle looked at the card, first without understanding. Then he went pale. Garrett Hawthorne, Duke of Stonemere. The silence became absolute. Garrett did not wait for a reaction. He turned and walked away, his steady footsteps echoing through the corridor, leaving behind a man who finally understood why the agreement could never be undone, and with whom he had truly been negotiating. Chapter 5. The Reuniting of Souls. Juliet was at the window when she saw the carriage. It was not the one from the night before. This one was plain, unmarked, drawn by ordinary horses. And yet she recognized Jenkins on the driver's box. When the door opened, her heart stopped. Catherine stepped down first, steadied by Mrs. Henley's firm hand. Thin, pale, yet whole. Alive. Thomas followed, clinging to the governess's skirt, his wide eyes scanning the street as if he expected someone to appear at any moment. Juliet did not think. She simply ran. She took the stairs too quickly, stumbled on the last step, caught herself on the banister and kept going. Mrs. Bartley called something after her, but Juliet did not hear. She crossed the corridor, ignored the butler who tried to intercept her, and flung open the side door hard enough for it to strike the wall. Catherine, Thomas! For a second, Catherine only stared, as if she needed proof that it was real. Then she ran. They met on the stone path. Juliet wrapped her sister in her arms, feeling how light her body was, the contained tremor, the muffled sobs against her shoulder. Thomas reached them a heartbeat later, clutching them both with desperate strength, his face buried in Juliet's dress. You did it, Catherine whispered, her voice breaking. I thought he'd caught you. I'm here, Juliet said, kissing the top of Catherine's head, then Thomas's. I'm here, you're safe. The words dissolved as tears finally came. They were not born of fear, not of despair. They were relief so fierce it almost hurt. Mrs. Henley stepped closer, laying a careful hand on Juliet's shoulder. "He kept his word," she said quietly. "The Duke. He negotiated until your uncle yielded. There were no raised voices, no violence, only an agreement." Juliet lifted her face, eyes blurred, searching for him. Garrett stood near the carriage, still. He did not smile. He showed no triumph. But there was something in his gaze, a silent understanding, that told her he knew the weight of this moment. It was not merely a rescue. It was a family being returned to itself. "Thank you," Juliet said, knowing the word was far too small. He gave a brief nod. "Come inside. We need to speak." Mrs. Bartley was already waiting at the door. She guided Catherine and Thomas in with gentle efficiency. Mrs. Henley followed them. Juliet lingered a moment behind, trying to regain her breath and her composure. Garrett approached, keeping a respectful distance. "They're underfed," he said practically, "especially the boy." "I've already asked for food, warm baths, and clean clothes." Juliet wiped her face with her bandaged hands. "He allowed it? My uncle simply agreed?" "We reached an arrangement." A pause, barely there. "He will sign the transfer of guardianship tomorrow. In exchange, he will receive compensation sufficient to settle debts and leave London." The world seemed to tilt beneath Juliet's feet. "You paid for us. I paid for freedom. We cannot repay you." "We have nothing. I asked for nothing in return." "Then why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why would you do this for strangers?" A cold December wind slipped between them. Garrett looked toward the house, toward the windows where two children were now safe. "Because there are men who understand only one language," he said at last. "And if speaking that language means you and two children are never treated as merchandise again, then it is worth the cost." Juliet felt there was more beneath the words, something old, something unspoken. But she did not press him. Some wounds did not belong to strangers. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he replied, already stepping away. "Just care for them while I finish what remains." "And if he tries to change his mind?" Garrett paused on the threshold. "He won't." The certainty in his voice was absolute. Juliet did not ask why. Inside the house, everything felt different. Voices drifted from the kitchen, Catherine laughing softly, Thomas asking for water with the timid politeness of a child, unaccustomed to being served. The sounds of home. She found them seated at the table. Bread, cheese, fruit, milk. Catherine ate slowly, as if afraid it might vanish. Thomas held his bread with too much force. Juliet sat between them. "I was frightened," Catherine confessed. "I thought he'd hurt you." "I was lucky to escape," Juliet said at once. "Is the Duke good?" Thomas asked, hesitating. "He won't sell us?" Juliet took her brother's hand. "No," she said. "He paid to free us, not to own us." Thomas nodded, still uncertain, but wanting to believe. Mrs. Henley sat with them. "He only revealed who he was at the end," she said in a low voice. "When he left his card on the table, your uncle understood there would be no further fight." Juliet's gaze went to Garrett, now speaking with Mrs. Bartley. When the housekeeper mentioned permanent rooms for the children, he nodded without hesitation. Then he looked toward Juliet for one brief moment, and something silent passed between them. Not a promise, not romance, but recognition. "Julie," Catherine touched her hand. "Are you all right?" Juliet smiled at last, effortlessly. "I am," she said, for the first time in a long time. And it was true. She did not know what would come next. There were risks, consequences, a price she did not yet fully understand. But in that moment, with Catherine safe, with Thomas holding her hand, Juliet allowed herself to believe that perhaps they had not found only refuge, but somehow a home. Chapter 6. The Dilemma of the Heart. Garrett could not concentrate. The documents lay spread across the mahogany desk. Guardianship papers, guarantees, clauses against contestation. Impeccable work by the solicitor, the kind of paperwork that usually soothed his mind. Order, structure, control. And yet his attention kept slipping. From the corridor came low voices, Juliet teaching Catherine how to align embroidery stitches, Thomas drawing in the sitting room, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. Sounds that house had not known in years. 1 week. 1 week since the children had crossed that threshold. 1 week of hurried footsteps on the stairs, muffled laughter at breakfast, Mrs. Bartley complaining she would need more fabric. 1 week of Juliet attempting to be invisible and achieving precisely the opposite. The day after Bloomsbury, the uncle had signed the papers. The agreement had been honoured. Now only the final documents from the solicitor remained. And still, Garrett felt as though nothing was truly finished. He went to the window. Grosvenor Square stretched below, elegant and predictable. His life had always been like this: calculation, safe distance from anything that might stain the Hawthorne name. And now he had allowed 2 orphans and a woman to place everything into question. A knock at the door. "Come in." Mrs. Bartley entered with the Morning Post on a tray. 3 letters. "These arrived earlier, Your Grace. The Dowager Duchesses came from Bath." His mother's handwriting was unmistakable. Garrett broke the blue seal bearing the Hawthorne crest and read quickly. She wrote with the delicacy of someone who understood her son's silences better than anyone. She spoke of Elena without ever writing her name, as though the right letters might still wound. She said the house in Bath felt different since his last letter, more alive, less still. And she confessed with almost timid honesty that this frightened her less than the emptiness Garrett had carried since the tragedy. In a few lines she admitted what she had always known. For years her son had survived, but had not truly inhabited the world. Of Philip she mentioned him only in passing, as one offers uncertain news. His brother had written to say he might return to England next season. Nothing decided, nothing arranged. But there was something new in the tone of Philip's letter, a curiosity, unexpected. "If he does come," his mother added, "for the first time it will not be only out of obligation." Garrett folded the letter slowly. He did not answer it at once. But for the first time in many years, he did not feel the urge to tuck it away like another familial duty filed and forgotten. Something at last was shifting. Garrett set the letter aside. His mother saw too much. She always had. "Miss Catherine asked whether she might use the library this afternoon," Mrs. Bartley added. "She said she would promise not to touch anything valuable." Garrett almost smiled. "Tell her the library is hers whenever she wishes," he said, "and that books are meant to be touched." Mrs. Bartley left, clearly pleased. Garrett opened the second letter, reports from the north. On any other day they would have claimed his attention. Today they were noise. The third bore no sender, only his name on the front in an unfamiliar hand. "Your Grace, rumors are circulating about a woman. Children, questionable arrangements. Misplaced kindness destroys reputations as easily as cruelty. Consider your duty, your name, your position. A concerned friend." Garrett read it twice. It was not a direct threat. It was a warning. Someone was watching, waiting for the smallest misstep. He crushed the paper and threw it into the fire, watching the flames devour the words, but not the reality behind them. Another knock. This time, hesitant. "Come in." Juliet entered. Simple dark green dress, her hands still marked folded before her. She carried dignity, but tension tightened her jaw. "We need to talk." Garrett gestured to the chair. Juliet sat, her back too straight. "About the money," she began, direct. "I need to know how much it was so that one day we can repay it." "There will be no repayment." "That's absurd." Frustration surfaced, clean and sharp. "You bought our freedom. That makes us indebted." "I did not buy you." "Then what do you call it?" Garrett held her gaze. He thought of the anonymous letter, of his mother in Bath, of Elena's name echoing even when unspoken. "I call it stopping something irreparable." Juliet rose and went to the window, wrapping her arms around herself. "I hate this," she whispered, "being a burden, owing so much." being unable to protect my siblings without a stranger paying the price. We are no longer strangers. She turned quickly. We're not? Garrett stood as well, but did not approach. You know my house. Your siblings sleep under my roof. And you trusted me when you had no reason to. I had no choice. You did, his voice lowered. And still, you chose. Juliet looked down at her hands. The fine scars caught the light. How much? He hesitated just long enough for her to know the truth mattered. £1,000. Her face drained of colour. Half the day I brought your siblings, the rest after the signatures. Juliet swallowed. Dignity battled panic, and barely won. I don't want to be transferred from one man to another, she said with effort, nor rescued at the cost of becoming a burden. Garrett met her gaze. You won't be. Ever. She drew a steady breath. Then let me pay. He frowned, confused. Pay? With work. Her voice steadied. With usefulness. I can teach. I can manage a household. I can assist Mrs. Bartley, organize accounts, be necessary. I don't want this to be charity or penance. The word penance tasted of iron. Mrs. Bartley told me, she added carefully. About your sister. Silence. She died in winter. They said it was a fall. I saw the marks. They said Eleanor fell. Society accepted the word fall as it accepted anything convenient, but I saw the marks on her wrist and the railing. It was not an accident. She did not fall. She let go. And I have carried that ever since. Juliet did not touch him. She simply stood there, present in a way that hurt. It wasn't your fault, she said. She begged not to be married to an old man in the name of duty. I called it responsibility, and I left her alone. The silence between them grew heavy. Catherine is nearly the age Elena was, Garrett continued, not looking at her, and I refuse to make the same mistake again. He turned. She stood too close. And yet she did not feel like danger. She felt like an anchor. I received a letter today, he said quietly, changing course. Anonymous, there are rumors. Juliet did not answer at once. Colour faded from her face. About me. And my siblings. About everything, Garrett confirmed. And if this grows, if it becomes scandal, it won't be mere social discomfort. It could stain my name, it could destroy you and your siblings. She lowered her gaze, fingers entwining tightly. I know, she said softly without defiance. I know what it means when society decides to crush someone. I've seen it, I've lived it. She lifted her eyes again. And that is exactly why I don't want to be the price of your fall. Garrett stepped closer. Perhaps you should go to a more secluded estate. I'm trying to protect you. I know. She breathed deeply. And I'm grateful, more than I can say, but protection doesn't have to mean distance. A brief silence followed. I would rather stay if you allow it, she continued, even knowing the risk, even knowing the weight. Not as someone who disregards your name, but as someone who chooses to share it. The word share fell between them with the force of an unspoken vow. Garrett covered her hands with his, as if the gesture might hold the world at bay. I don't want you paying for something I chose to do. Then don't send me away as though I were a mistake to be corrected, she replied softly. If there is consequence, let it be because we stayed and faced it together. The air between them vibrated. Garrett thought of his mother in Bath, of Philip on the brink of returning, of Elena in the final silence of the grave. And he thought that perhaps, just perhaps, it was not a sin to want a second chance. Urgent knocking shattered the moment. Your Grace, Mrs. Bartley's voice came, controlled but tense, from the corridor. There is a solicitor at the door. He says he comes on behalf of Mr. Colburn. He has brought the final documents. Juliet's stomach clenched, even knowing it was expected. Her body reacted before reason, as though every hard-won safety was still too fragile to trust. Garrett lifted his head at once. His expression was not surprise, but alertness. The caution men like him never fully abandoned. Tell him I am coming down, he said, already stepping away from the desk. He turned back to Juliet once, his gaze steady. "Stay with your siblings. There is no reason for them to witness this. It's just confirmation?" she asked, her voice betraying the fear she could not suppress. "He hasn't changed his mind?" "No," Garrett replied with deliberate calm. "But I only consider something finished when it is on paper, signed, registered." She nodded, drawing a deep breath. Garrett left then, not bracing for an attack, but for the one thing that truly kept men like Juliet's uncle at bay: indisputable documents. Chapter 7. The Choice of the Heart. Juliet did not go where Garrett had asked her to immediately. She stopped in the corridor, a few steps from the library, uncertain. She knew she should be with Catherine and Thomas. She also knew it was not her place to involve herself in legal matters she did not fully understand. And yet she remained, not to hear words, but because she needed to know, needed to feel whether everything was finally safe. The library door was closed. Voices reached her only in fragments, indistinct. It was merely the tone, male, formal, controlled, that revealed a man accustomed to seals, papers, and irrevocable decisions. Juliet did not try to catch the words. She did not need to. There was a pause, too long to be meaningless, then the unmistakable sound of papers being handled. An envelope opened, the focused silence that always preceded important decisions. Then something changed. She did not hear what was said, but she felt what was not. Relief moved through the air like an invisible current. She sensed it before she saw anything. The door opened a few minutes later. Garrett stepped out with a folder of documents in his hands. His expression was serious, as it always was, but there was something different now, less weight on his shoulders. An ending. "It's done," he said simply when he found her there. "Signed. Registered. He leaves London today." Juliet had to brace her hand against the wall. There was a brief pause. She imagined Garrett receiving the envelope, examining it with that calm that always seemed to contain a decision already made. "Is there anything else?" Garrett asked at last. "Only this," the soft sound of paper. "A letter. He asked that it be delivered to Miss Juliet Colburn. I was instructed to say it requires no reply." Juliet felt her heart quicken. "I'll see that she receives it," Garrett said. There was something in his tone, not gentleness, but firm, deliberate protection. A moment later, the door closed. Juliet stepped out of her hiding place. Garrett remained near the entrance, 2 envelopes in his hands, one thick and official, the other smaller, sealed with plain wax. He saw her without surprise. "You heard? I know you asked me to stay with my siblings, but—" "It's finished," he said, lifting the larger document. "Complete. Irreversible." Juliet's legs gave way. Garrett caught her by the elbow and guided her to a chair. "Breathe." She did, her body trembling beneath the weight of relief that almost hurt. "It's over," she asked, her voice fragile. "Truly?" "Yes. Catherine and Thomas are legally under my guardianship." The tears came quietly. No sobs, just the release of something held for far too long. Garrett knelt before her and offered a handkerchief. He did not touch her. He simply stayed. "Thank you," Juliet whispered, "for believing, for not giving up." She caught his hand before he could withdraw. Garrett turned his palm, threading his fingers through hers. "Eleanor would have liked you," he said softly. "Your courage. I wish I had known her. She would have said you're far too brave." A half smile appeared. "And she would have been right." Juliet laughed. Brief, damp, genuine. Courage keeps people alive. They remained like that for a moment, hands joined, a closeness too improper to ignore. Garrett broke the silence, extending the smaller envelope. "This is for you." Juliet stiffened. "You don't have to read it," he said. "I can—" "No." She drew a steady breath. "I need to." She opened the letter. The handwriting was uneven, without greeting. "You won. Take them. They were never profitable anyway. But know this. You are as guilty as I am. You chose a duke instead of family. The difference between us is only the price and who paid it. Do not look for me. R. Colburn Juliet read it twice. On the third time she laughed, not in amusement, but in disbelief. She handed the letter to Garrett. He read it in silence, his jaw tightening. Do you want me to? No. She took the paper back and dropped it into the fire. She watched the flames consume every word. He doesn't deserve a reply, nor anger, only oblivion. She turned. There were no tears now, only clarity. He's wrong. I didn't sell myself. I chose to trust someone who gave me reasons to trust. Garrett stepped closer, stopped so near that the world seemed to draw inward. There is a price, he said quietly, and I paid it. Not out of duty, not out of guilt, but because the moment I saw you and your siblings, I understood there are things worse than losing reputation. He held her gaze. Losing you would be one of them. Juliet felt the force of the words before she answered. It was not a promise, not poetry, it was choice. He had chosen them. Chapter 8. The definitive gesture. 1 week later, Garrett's solicitor did not usually appear without notice. Mr. Whitfield entered the study with his leather portfolio held tightly against his chest, his expression grave enough to make it clear this was no routine matter. I apologize for the alarm, Your Grace, he said, as the door closed behind him. But this could not wait. Garrett studied him for a moment before speaking. In that brief pause, he thought of the children scattered through the house, of Juliet likely nearby, and of how the calm of the past few days felt far too fragile to last. What happened? Whitfield opened the portfolio carefully and removed several documents. I received a visit this morning from Lord Heathfield. The name alone was enough to set every muscle in Garrett's body rigid. Go on. He learned of the transfer of guardianship. I do not know how. He came to my office demanding to know whether the girl, Miss Catherine, was still available for marriage. The anger that rose in Garrett was cold, silent, contained. What did you tell him? That the guardianship had been legally transferred to you, that any discussion regarding the girl's future would have to be addressed directly to Your Grace. Whitfield hesitated. He was not pleased. I can imagine. Heathfield has influence, power, and he is furious at having lost what he believed to be a settled arrangement. He may attempt to cause difficulties. What kind? Rumors, legal challenges, suggestions of coercion. The solicitor adjusted his spectacles. He may claim the agreement was made under undue pressure, using your position as a duke. Garrett moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. The uncle will not testify. He has already left London, and he will not wish his own dealings brought to light. I agree. Still, Heathfield may pursue another angle. Whitfield drew a breath. He may suggest impropriety, an unmarried woman living under your roof. Children without direct relatives, arrangements that could be deemed questionable. Garrett turned. I see. What do you recommend? 3 options, Whitfield said, enumerating them calmly. Send the children to one of your estates, away from London, or find relations willing to take them in temporarily, or... He stopped. Or formalize the arrangement in a way that cannot be challenged. Marriage, Garrett finished. Yes, Your Grace. If Miss Colburn were your wife, the guardianship would be unassailable. Heathfield would have no legal footing. Rumors would lose their force. Silence followed. The solution was logical, clean, final, and profoundly dangerous. I need time to consider, Garrett said. I understand, but Heathfield gave me 1 week. He said that if the girl is not returned, he will pursue legal and social measures. I understand. You may go. When he was alone, Garrett braced his hands on the desk. Sending the children away would mean separating them from Juliet. Sending Juliet away would mean repeating the same mistake he had always made, sacrificing what mattered to preserve an untarnished reputation. A discreet knock sounded at the door. Come in, Garrett said, still facing away. Juliet entered quietly. There was no urgency in her movements, only restraint. She closed the door behind her before speaking. "Mrs. Bartley told me a solicitor was here," she said. "I didn't wish to hear more than that, but I thought I should know enough not to imagine worse." Garrett turned. "Heathfield has not given up." She nodded, absorbing the information without surprise. "I expected as much." She drew a steady breath. "And I imagine it puts you in an impossible position. I'm trying to protect you." "I know," she replied at once, firm. "That is why I'm here." He frowned slightly, attentive. "When you speak of sending us away," Juliet continued, choosing each word carefully, "I understand the reason. I don't think it would be cruelty, nor abandonment." "Then why do you seem so opposed?" She hesitated only a moment. "You have already done more for us than anyone should ever be required to do. You paid. You faced dangerous men. You risked your name. I cannot accept that you now lose everything because of me." Silence fell between them, dense and heavy. "You are not being ungrateful," Garrett said at last. "You are being fair." "I try to be," she replied softly, "and fairness requires that I say this. If the only way to keep us safe is for us to leave, then I will accept it." Something shifted in his gaze. "No," he said quietly, decisively. "I don't want that." Juliet blinked. "Your Grace, I paid £1,000. I assumed legal guardianship. I placed myself deliberately in the path of men like Heathfield." He stepped closer. "I did not do all that only to push you away when it became difficult," she swallowed. "Then what are you considering?" He closed his eyes briefly, thought of Elena, of the Hawthorne name, of his mother in Bath, of the weight of generations. When he spoke again, there was no hesitation. "Marriage?" Juliet froze. "What? If you were my wife, no one could question your presence here, nor the children's, not Heathfield, not society." His voice remained steady. "It would not be a romantic gesture. It would be a shield." "That is not love," she said with quiet honesty. "No," he agreed, holding her gaze. "It is a conscious choice, respect, and commitment to what I have already taken responsibility for." "And if I say no?" "Then I will seek another solution," he said without retreat. "But it will be more dangerous, and we will have less time." She took a deep breath. "So this is not an ultimatum?" "No," Garrett replied firmly. "It is the only option that allows everyone to remain without anyone being sacrificed." Juliet walked to the window, gazing out at the silent square. "And this marriage," she said at last, "what would it be?" "An honest arrangement," he answered, "with room to become something more, only if we both wish it." She turned slowly. "I need time to think." "You have 1 week." Juliet nodded. There was no anger on her face, only the weight of a choice too large to be made in haste. She left in silence. Garrett remained alone, aware that he had just offered the only thing capable of saving them, and perhaps the only thing capable of destroying him. Chapter 9. The inevitable surrender. Juliet did not come down to dinner. She sent her apologies through Mrs. Bartley, claiming a headache. It was not a lie. Her head had been throbbing since her conversation with Garrett, every pulse of her heart repeating the impossible word he had spoken. Marriage. She sat in the room she now called her own, watching the sun sink over Grosvenor Square. The golden light softened the rooftops, turning them almost beautiful, almost peaceful, but her mind found no rest. "If you were my wife," the words echoed, insistent. Duchess. Juliet Colburn, an orphan without fortune, without name, transformed into one of the most highly placed women in England. It was absurd. It was impossible. It was the only solution. A soft knock sounded at the door. Catherine entered without waiting for permission, as she always did, carrying a tray with tea and toast. "Mrs. Bartley said you weren't feeling well," she said, setting the tray on the small table. "I brought something light." Juliet forced a smile. "Thank you, my dear, but you didn't have to." Catherine sat on the edge of the bed, studying her with those brown eyes, far too perceptive for 14. You're lying. I know when you're worried. She hesitated. Is it because of that man? The Lord? I heard Mrs. Henley say he wants to take me. Juliet's heart clenched. She took her sister's hand. I won't allow it. Never. But he has rights, doesn't he? Catherine's voice wavered. Uncle made some arrangement with him, and now that Uncle doesn't want us anymore. No. Juliet squeezed her hand firmly. The Duke has legal guardianship. No one can take you from here. No one. Catherine breathed a little easier, though fear still lingered. He's good, isn't he? The Duke? She asked softly. He won't do what Uncle wanted? Never. The certainty surprised even Juliet herself. He paid £1,000 for our freedom, not to own us, to protect us. £1,000, Catherine murmured, awed. That's more money than I can imagine. I know. How will we ever repay that? Juliet looked at her sister, so young and yet already marked by too much. Perhaps we can't, she admitted. But some debts aren't paid with coins. Catherine fell silent. Then she asked very softly, Do you like him? Juliet hesitated. I respect him. I'm grateful. He saved our lives. But do you like him? Like. She thought of Garrett's dark gold eyes, of the way he looked at her, of the quiet respect, of the raw pain when he spoke of Elena. I don't know, she confessed. Perhaps I'm beginning to. Catherine smiled, a small, true smile. He looks at you differently, not like Uncle, not like possession. Like a person. You notice that? I've learned to pay attention. She shrugged. Men show who they are through their eyes. Uncle looked as if he were pricing goods. That lord. She shuddered. Like meat. But the Duke looks at you as if you were light. Juliet pulled her into an embrace. When did you grow up so much? When I had to, Catherine replied against her shoulder. Just like you. After her sister fell asleep, Juliet was alone again. Marriage. With Garrett Hawthorne. Duke of Stonemere. It was not romance, there were no declarations of love, only pragmatism wrapped in honesty. But there was something else, the way he had said he could not bear the thought of sending them away, the way he had offered a choice, not an ultimatum. She looked at herself in the mirror, nothing extraordinary, nothing that justified a duke's attention. But Garrett did not look at her searching for the extraordinary. He looked as if he truly saw her, as if you were light. Would it be enough to build something founded on respect, protection, and possibility? She thought of her mother, of Elena, of Catherine. Perhaps a marriage built on choice and truth was better than many that began in passion and ended in silence. The price was high, society, stares, poisoned whispers. But her siblings would be safe, and that was enough. The next morning, she came down before breakfast. Garrett stood in the study, facing the window. He turned when she entered. He did not ask. He simply waited. Yes, Juliet said. He blinked. Yes? I accept. I will marry you. Garrett approached slowly, studying her face. Are you certain? No, she answered honestly, but I trust you more than I have trusted any man except my father. That isn't much. For me, it's everything. He held out his hand. She took it. It was not romance. It was a pact, but there was warmth and safety. When? She asked. Soon. 3 days, perhaps 4. Before Heathfield can act. And your family? They will accept it, he said simply. This is our choice. There will be scandal. We've already survived one. She swallowed. I will be a dreadful duchess. You'll learn, he said, touching her face with care. And I will be at your side. Why? She asked, needing to hear it. He took a moment. Because when you stepped into my carriage, something in me broke, or was repaired. And I don't wish to return to the man I was before. Is that love? I don't know. He brushed away a tear with his thumb. But perhaps it is the beginning. And Juliet understood. They were not marrying for love. but for the possibility of it. And for now, that was enough. 3 days, she said. 3 days. There was no kiss, only foreheads touching, hands entwined, and the silent decision to face the world together, even without knowing exactly what together would come to mean. Epilogue. The carriage passed through the wrought-iron gates at dawn, and something shifted in Juliet's chest. It was not fear, it was not doubt, it was recognition. Home. Stonemere rose before her, imposing beneath a lavender-tinted sky. Pale stone, tall windows, towers brushing the horizon, gardens stretched in every direction, just awakening to spring, soft greens mingling with the first yellows and whites of early blooms. Garrett sat beside her, watching her reaction with a care that still surprised her. Even after 3 months as his wife, she had not grown used to the way he looked at her, as if every expression mattered. "It's larger than I imagined," she said quietly. "It's home," he replied, his hand finding hers. "Our home now." Our. The wedding had taken place quickly, just as promised. A special license, a simple ceremony in the chapel at Grosvenor Square. Only Mrs. Bartley, Mrs. Henley, Catherine, Thomas and the vicar. No banquet, no public celebration and no regret. London had reacted as expected. A duke marrying a woman without name or fortune was scandal enough to feed drawing rooms and papers for weeks. Garrett's mother had written, surprised, cautious but without reproach, inviting them to visit Bath when they were ready. Philip sent a brief note from Scotland. "At last, you've done something interesting. When may I meet her?" And Lord Heathfield had vanished. No legal action, no lingering rumours, only silence. Garrett never explained why, but Juliet suspected that certain conversations, in certain clubs, had made it clear that persistence would be unwise. The first months in London had been an education, measuring glances, polite smiles. Juliet learned quickly. Mrs. Bartley proved a patient teacher in etiquette, posture, the invisible codes that separated a duchess from an impostor. But more than that, she learned Garrett. That he rose early and worked late, that he smiled rarely, but when he did it transformed his entire face. That some nights were difficult, haunted by Elena, and he would stand for hours at the window. That he was fair with servants, firm with tenants, ruthless with those who exploited the weak. And she learned that their marriage, begun as an agreement, was slowly, very slowly, becoming something else. They did not yet share a bed. Garrett had been clear. He would not demand intimacy she was not ready to give. But there were gestures, hands intertwined at the table, his protective arm at social events, chaste kisses to her forehead before parting, and there were moments, lingering glances, conversations that lasted deep into the night, laughter born from something Catherine said or Thomas drew. It was not sweeping passion. It was real, built on respect and choice. The carriage stopped. Servants waited, aligned, curious to meet the new Duchess. Juliet felt her nerves tighten until Garrett's hand closed over hers. "Breathe," he murmured. "They will love you. I gave very clear instructions." Instructions? To be kind, and to understand that you are Duchess because you deserve to be, not by accident of birth. She laughed, moved. They stepped down. Catherine and Thomas leapt from the second carriage, wide-eyed. Thomas immediately pointed toward the stables. Catherine squeezed Juliet's hand, torn between wonder and composure. "Is it ours?" she whispered. "It is ours," Juliet replied, still learning the word. The butler approached. "Your Grace," he said, bowing to Garrett, then to Juliet. "Your Grace, it is an honor to welcome you to Stonemere." The sincerity in his tone loosened something inside her. Garrett led her upstairs as the children were taken to their rooms. He stopped before a set of double doors and opened them. Juliet caught her breath. The library, books from floor to ceiling, sliding ladders, broad windows overlooking the gardens, armchairs near the hearth, and on the table, a vase of narcissus, the first flowers of spring. "Elena loved this place," Garrett said quietly. "After she died, I locked it. I couldn't enter. I thought, Perhaps you could give it life again. Garrett, it's yours. Do as you wish. But I want you to have a space where you can be only Juliet. Not a duchess, she did not think. She simply stepped forward and kissed him. It was brief, chaste, chosen. When she drew back, he looked at her with surprise and something deeper. Thank you, she whispered. We have time, he replied, touching her face. And I don't believe I married you out of convenience. No? I think some part of me already knew, that night in the carriage. For better? Infinitely better. 6 months later, summer had claimed Stonemere entirely. The gardens burst with colour. Thomas drew endlessly. Catherine, now 15, bloomed. Lessons, piano, a growing curiosity about the estate's management. And Juliet discovered that being a duchess was above all responsibility, people, choices, community. She convinced Garrett to build a school, found purpose she had never known to seek, and she found love. Not in a dramatic moment, but in quiet growth, in small gestures. In nights when the distance between rooms became absurd, until one evening she simply knocked on his door. From that night on, they shared a life. Juliet was in the gardens when Garrett found her, barefoot on the grass, a peach-colored dress moving with the breeze. Mrs. Graves is horrified, he murmured, wrapping his arms around her. She'll survive. He laughed. My mother will visit next month, Philip as well. They wish to meet the woman who made me happy again. I'm happy too, Juliet said, even though we never planned this. Especially because of that, he replied, because we choose each other every day. Garrett kissed her, without restraint, without care, the kiss of a man who loved. I love you, he said for the first time. I love you too, she answered, without hesitation. That night in the library filled with life, drawings on the walls, Narcissus in the vase, Juliet understood. Home was not where she had been born, it was where she had chosen, and there at last they all belonged.